Tom had always loved peaceful places. That's why, when he found a small house by a quiet lake on the edge of a sleepy town, he knew it was the right place for him. The lake shimmered under the sunlight, birds flew freely in the sky, and the air smelled clean and fresh. It was perfect for someone like Tom, calm, quiet, and a little private. He bought the house years ago, not just the building but also the land behind it, which included the entire lake. Most people didn't know that part. He wasn't the kind of man who bragged or talked about what he owned. He just wanted to enjoy life peacefully. And that's what he did. Tom loved being out on the water. He had a small boat that he used for fishing or just relaxing in the middle of the lake on sunny afternoons. Sometimes he'd take a book or some sandwiches with him and float for hours. It became his favorite part of the day. Just him, his boat, and the sound of water gently moving around him. The community around the lake slowly grew. New houses were built, and a homeowners association, or HOA, was formed. Tom wasn't part of the HOA. His property, along with the lake, had been bought before the HOA even existed. He knew he didn't have to follow their rules, but again, he didn't feel the need to make that clear. Why cause trouble when there was no need? Years passed, and Tom continued living the same way. The HOA didn't bother him, and he didn't bother them. But then, something changed. One morning, Tom opened his mailbox and found a letter with the HOA's logo at the top. He was surprised. They had never sent him anything before. The envelope looked official, and the paper inside had a serious tone. As he read the letter, his eyebrows slowly rose in confusion and disbelief. The HOA was telling him that his boat was not allowed on the lake. They said it was unsightly and in violation of community appearance standards. The letter also said that boats were not allowed to be docked or used on the lake for personal purposes unless approved by the HOA board. They gave him 7 days to move the boat or face a fine of $50 per day. Tom read the letter twice, then a third time. It didn't make any sense. He looked out his window at the boat resting peacefully by the shore. It had been there for years, never once causing any problems. No one had ever complained. In fact, a few neighbors had even admired it. Some had asked if he could take them for a short ride, and he had happily done so. He sat down and took a deep breath. It wasn't just about the boat. It was about the lake. Did the HOA think they controlled the lake? He looked over the letter again. Yes, they were treating the lake as if it was part of the community property. But it wasn't. Tom knew this very well because when he bought his house, he also bought the entire lake. Still, he didn't want to start a fight. That wasn't his nature. So the next day, he decided to speak calmly to one of the HOA members. He walked over to the community office and asked if he could talk to someone about the letter. A woman behind the desk looked at him sharply and said, "If this is about the boat, the board has already made its decision." Tom explained kindly that the lake behind his home was actually part of his private property, and the boat wasn't, violating any rules because the HOA didn't have authority over his land. The woman didn't believe him. She gave a tight smile and said, "The lake is part of the community, sir. Everyone knows that. It's a shared resource." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a map or some kind of deed that shows that?" The woman shook her head and said, "Our documents say the lake is community property. If you don't like the rules, you can attend the next HOA meeting and present your case. But the boat must be removed by Friday, or you'll begin receiving daily fines." Tom walked back home slowly. He wasn't angry, not yet, but he was surprised by how sure the HOA seemed. They didn't even want to check the facts. It was as if they had already decided he was wrong, without even listening. He thought about the years he had lived there peacefully. No issues, no conflicts. And now, suddenly, he was being treated like some kind of troublemaker. That evening, Tom made himself a cup of tea and sat at his kitchen table with a large folder. It was filled with papers from when he bought the house and the land. He carefully opened it and began searching through the documents. After about 20 minutes, he found what he was looking for: a property deed that clearly stated the boundaries of his land. The lake, every inch of it, was included. He smiled to himself. He had known it all along, but it was good to have the proof in hand. Now the real question was, what should he do? Should he bring this to the HOA meeting and correct them politely? Or should he just ignore them and let them waste their time trying to find him? Tom decided to wait. He wasn't in a rush. Let them send another letter, he thought. Maybe then they would start to realize they had made a mistake. A few days later, another envelope arrived. This one was even more aggressive. It said that he had failed to follow the HOA's instructions and that fines would now begin accumulating. They also added a warning that continued violation could result in legal action. Tom chuckled when he read that line. Legal action? Over a boat? On a lake that he owned? He still didn't respond. Not yet. But word started spreading in the neighborhood. A few neighbors asked him what was going on. One woman even said, "I heard the HOA might take you to court." Tom just smiled and said, "They're welcome to try." Then, something strange happened. One morning, Tom noticed a group of men near the lake. They were wearing uniforms with HOA logos. One of them was taking pictures of his boat. Another was writing something on a clipboard. Tom stepped outside and waved to them. "Can I help you with something?" he asked. One man looked up and said, "We're documenting the violation." "What violation?" Tom asked, still smiling. "Unauthorized use of community property," the man replied. Tom laughed, a deep, honest laugh that confused the men. "You guys really don't know, do you?" he said. The man frowned. "Know what?" Tom didn't answer. He turned and walked back inside. That night, Tom decided it was time. He would go to the next HOA meeting. He wasn't going there to argue. He was going there to teach them a simple lesson about facts and ownership. But he also started thinking about something else. If the HOA believed they owned the lake, what else had they done with it? He had always allowed people to fish there, to walk around it, even to host a couple of small parties. He had never said no. But now, with them acting like they were in charge, he began wondering if they had done something bigger, like building structures, hosting clubs, maybe even collecting fees for using his lake. If that was true, then this wasn't just about a boat anymore. This was about a group of people taking control of something they never owned, and acting like they had all the power. That wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous. Tom looked out at the lake again. The moonlight danced on the water and his boat rocked gently in the breeze. It had never looked more peaceful. And yet, beneath that peace, something was beginning to change. The quiet man who loved calm and silence was starting to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: the need to stand up. And when he did, the HOA would finally, who really owned the lake. Tom sat on his porch with a cup of coffee in his hand and a calm expression on his face. The morning air was cool and peaceful. Birds chirped from the trees, and the lake sparkled under the soft sunlight. It was a perfect day. At least it looked like one from the outside. But inside, Tom's mind was full of old memories, paperwork, and the quiet storm brewing with the HOA. He couldn't stop thinking about the way the HOA acted in the last few days. They were confident. No, not just confident. They were arrogant. They were so sure that the lake belonged to them, so certain that Tom's boat was breaking rules, that they didn't even stop to ask questions. They thought they were the bosses of everything around the neighborhood. But what they didn't know, or maybe what they never bothered to find out, was the truth. Tom didn't just own the house he lived in. He owned the entire lake, too. Tom remembered the day he bought the property like it happened yesterday. He had been looking for a quiet place to retire, somewhere with space, nature, and no busy city noise. After months of searching, his real estate agent called him with something special. "It's a bit unusual," she had said. "It's a house that comes with more land than most. Actually, it comes with a whole lake." Tom had been surprised. "A lake?" he had asked. "Yes," the agent had said. "The lake is technically private land. The seller owns it and is including it in the sale." At the time, the lake was surrounded by only a few houses. The neighborhood was just beginning to grow, and there was no HOA yet. The owner had bought up a large area years before and now wanted to sell parts of it. Tom didn't need much convincing. The moment he saw the place in person, he knew it was right. He signed the papers, paid for the property, and just like that, became the owner of not only the house, but the lake too. The paperwork clearly described everything. It included maps, legal descriptions of the land boundaries, and official county documents showing the lake as part of Tom's property. It was all clear, complete, and legally binding. But over the years, people seemed to forget that detail, or maybe they just never knew. When the HOA was formed a few years later, Tom was invited to join. But since his land wasn't part of the HOA development, he politely declined. There was no reason for him to be involved. His property wasn't included in the HOA's charter, and he didn't use any of their services. He kept to himself, enjoyed the lake, and watched as the neighborhood slowly grew around him. The lake became a popular spot. Neighbors would come to fish, kids would splash around in the shallow parts, and some people even brought inflatable boats or paddleboards. Tom never minded. He wasn't the kind of man to stop people from enjoying nature. As long as they respected the lake, cleaned up after themselves, and didn't cause trouble, he was happy to share. Then came the fishing club. One weekend, Tom saw a group of people setting up a big tent by the shore near the center of the lake. They wore matching shirts that said Greenwood Lake Anglers Club. They brought coolers, chairs, and even put up a portable grill. There were a few tables with trophies on them, and one man held a microphone. It looked like a small fishing tournament. Tom walked over and asked, "Hey, what's going on here?" One of the men smiled and said, "Oh, we're the fishing club. The HOA gave us permission to hold monthly tournaments here. They said it's community property, and we could use the lake as long as we clean up afterward." Tom had raised his eyebrows but kept quiet. He didn't want to ruin their day. The people seemed friendly, and the event wasn't causing harm. He had simply nodded and walked back home. At the time, he thought it was just a one-time event. He figured the HOA probably didn't understand the ownership of the lake. But since everything was peaceful, he didn't feel the need to correct them. But the fishing club didn't stop. Every month, they came back, bigger and louder. More people, more noise, more trash. At first, Tom tolerated it. Then he began to notice problems. Empty soda cans and snack wrappers left on the grass. Fishing lines tangled in trees. One day, he found a cigarette butt floating near his boat dock. He wasn't happy. He contacted the HOA and asked them to speak with the club. He mentioned that people were leaving trash and causing damage, but the HOA brushed it off. "They're a responsible group," the board president told him. "We've never had complaints." Tom could feel their attitude shift. They didn't see him as the lake's owner. They saw him as just another neighbor making a fuss. That was when he realized something important. The HOA had made up their own story about the lake. Somewhere along the way, they started acting as if it belonged to them. Maybe they assumed it had been donated. Maybe they thought it was part of the common area when the neighborhood was built. Maybe they just never looked into it at all, but now their mistake was turning into disrespect. After that, Tom started paying closer attention. He noticed that the HOA had installed small signs near the lake entrance that read, "Lake Rules, Property of Greenwood HOA." That made him stop in his tracks. Property of Greenwood HOA? He couldn't believe what he was seeing. That was a lie. A complete lie. He took a photo of the sign and sent an email to the HOA. He politely informed them that the lake was his private property, and that they should remove the signs immediately. He received no reply. Instead, a few days later, came the letter about his boat. Now it all made sense. They weren't just confused. They were rewriting history. They believed they could control the lake, the boat, the fishing events, everything. And they were willing to push anyone who got in their way, even the man who actually owned the land. Tom was done staying silent. He dug deeper into his property records. He made copies of everything: maps, legal titles, county tax assessments, and zoning details. He even found an old aerial photograph from when the area had only 5 houses and a long, empty shoreline. Back then, it was just him and nature. The HOA hadn't even been created. Tom realized how far things had gone. He had allowed the neighborhood to enjoy the lake out of kindness, but now they were acting like it was their right. They had put up signs, created rules, hosted clubs, and were now threatening to fine him for using his own property. He thought about the people who ran the HOA. They weren't evil, but they were careless. They had gotten too comfortable with power. They never checked the truth. They assumed everything was theirs to manage. They didn't just forget who owned the lake, they erased it. Tom made a decision. He wouldn't yell or fight. He wouldn't send angry letters or get into arguments online. Instead, he would do what he always did: stay calm, stay patient, and prepare. He knew that facts were stronger than pride, and truth would speak louder than their threats. The next HOA meeting was coming up in a week. He circled the date on his calendar. He planned to bring all his documents, speak clearly, and show them everything. Not to humiliate them, but to remind them of the truth. They thought they owned the lake, but they were about to find out who really did. And this time, Tom wouldn't stay quiet. The night of the HOA meeting arrived. Tom got dressed neatly, picked up his folder of papers, and walked slowly toward the community hall where the meeting was being held. It was a short walk, but in his heart, it felt like the beginning of something bigger. This wasn't just a small chat anymore. This was about standing up for what was right. The calm and quiet man who never liked to make noise was now ready to speak. And when he did, the entire HOA board would hear something they had never expected. When Tom entered the room, he noticed the long table in the front where the HOA board members sat. There were about 30 people already seated in rows of chairs, facing the board. Some were whispering to each other, others holding papers or sipping coffee from styrofoam cups. A few people glanced at Tom as he walked in, and some of them gave him polite nods. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and warm coffee. A clock ticked loudly on the wall, and a fan buzzed in the corner. At the front, behind the table, sat the HOA president, a tall man named Mr. Hawthorne. He wore a navy blue suit and glasses that rested at the tip of his nose. His voice was deep and serious as he welcomed everyone to the monthly meeting. "Let's keep this quick tonight," Mr. Hawthorne said. "We've got a few new complaints and updates. Then we'll move on to open discussion." Tom sat quietly, near the middle row, holding his folder in his lap. He waited patiently as the board discussed things like sidewalk repairs, trash pickup issues, and a neighbor who painted their mailbox green instead of the approved black. Then the topic shifted. "We also need to address the boat issue again," Mr. Hawthorne announced. "It's still on the lake, and the fines have begun adding up. If the resident refuses to comply, we may need to seek legal advice." Tom stood up slowly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice clear but gentle. "I'd like to speak on that matter." All heads turned toward him. Mr. Hawthorne looked slightly surprised but nodded. "You'll have 3 minutes," he said. Tom smiled politely. "I may need a few more. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." He walked calmly to the front of the room and placed his folder on the table. Then he looked around at the people watching him. "My name is Tom Laker," he began, "and I live in the small brown house at the east end of the lake. I've lived there for over 20 years, Some of you know me, some of you may not. But I've always tried to be a good neighbor." He opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the deed to my property, dated back to when I purchased the house. It clearly shows that my land includes not just the house and yard, but the entire lake." He held it up so people could see, then placed it on the table. The room fell silent. "This is a county map," he continued, holding up another paper, "and this shows property lines. As you can see, the lake is outlined and marked under my name. Not the HOA's, not the city's. Mine." There were murmurs now. People shifted in their chairs. Some whispered to their neighbors. Mr. Hawthorne squinted at the paper but said nothing yet. Tom continued, his voice steady. "For years, I've allowed people to enjoy the lake. I've let families fish, kids swim, even clubs hold events. I never charged anyone, never stopped anyone. I believed in sharing the beauty of this place." He paused and looked at the board. "But in the last few weeks, I've received letters, threats of fines, accusations, and now I see that signs have been put up claiming the lake is HOA property. That's not just a mistake, it's disrespect." The room was now completely quiet. Tom picked up another paper. "This is a letter from the original land developer. It confirms that the lake was never sold to the HOA. It was always private land." He glanced at Mr. Hawthorne, who looked uncomfortable. "I have tax records too," Tom said. "I pay property taxes on the lake every year. It's not part of your budget, not part of your maintenance. It's mine." Mr. Hawthorne finally cleared his throat. "Mr. Laker, we were under the impression that the lake was common property." Tom smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was calm, serious, and a little sharp. "That's the problem. You assumed. You never asked. You never checked. And then you sent me letters like I was breaking rules, when in fact you were the ones crossing the line." A few people clapped softly. Others nodded. One woman in the back said, "I had no idea." Tom turned toward the crowd. "And I don't blame the neighbors. You were told the lake belonged to the community. But the truth is, it doesn't. And starting now, things will need to change." He opened the last part of his folder and pulled out a final document. "This is a notice of restriction. It states that no organization, including the HOA, may host events or use the lake without the written permission of the landowner." "That's me." Mr. Hawthorne raised his hands. "Now wait a minute. Are you saying we can't even let the fishing club use it anymore?" Tom looked him straight in the eye. "Not without asking, not without respect. I've been generous for years, but you decided to ignore the truth and treat me like a rule breaker. That ends today." Someone from the board mumbled, "We might need legal advice after all." Tom gathered his papers. "You're welcome to seek legal advice, but I suggest you start by reading the documents I just gave you. The truth is right there in black and white." He turned to leave, then stopped. "And about the fines? Tear them up. They mean nothing. You can't fine someone for using their own land." He walked back to his seat. The meeting continued for a while, but no one paid much attention after that. The board looked shaken. Neighbors were whispering. Some smiled at Tom. Others just sat in shock. For the first time they realized something important. The man with the small boat wasn't just a quiet old neighbor. He was the actual owner of the lake. After the meeting ended, a few neighbors came to talk to him. "I'm so sorry," one man said. "We never knew. They told us it was part of the HOA land." "I should have asked," said another woman. "I feel embarrassed now." Tom nodded kindly. "Don't worry, I'm not angry, but I want things to be clear moving forward." A few days later, the sign saying, "Property of HOA," disappeared. The fishing club stopped showing up, and no more letters arrived in Tom's mailbox. Instead, Mr. Hawthorne himself knocked on Tom's door one afternoon. He looked nervous, holding a folder in his hands. "Mr. Laker," he said, I just wanted to apologize personally. We didn't do our homework. You were right, and we were wrong." Tom invited him in. They talked for almost an hour, and by the end of it, they shook hands. Mr. Hawthorne agreed that the HOA would no longer interfere with the lake, and if anyone wanted to use it for events, they'd come directly to Tom, with respect and permission. Tom felt a sense of peace, not just because the problem was solved, but because he had done it the right way. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't threatened. He had used facts, patience, and calm strength. Now, when Tom sat in his boat, floating gently in the middle of the lake, he felt something even deeper than before. He wasn't just enjoying nature. He was protecting it, owning it, and standing strong. The lake had always been his peaceful escape. Now it was also a place where truth had won. A week after the HOA meeting, everything around the lake felt different. The signs claiming the lake as HOA property were gone. The fishing club didn't return, and the letters demanding Tom to move his boat had stopped. It was quiet again, peaceful, just the way Tom liked it. But something had changed, not just in the neighborhood, but in how people looked at Tom. The quiet old man with the boat was now known as the man who owned the lake and stood up to the HOA. People began seeing him differently, and some didn't like it. Tom wasn't looking for attention. All he had wanted was respect and fairness. He didn't mind sharing the lake. He never had. But when people started acting like he was the problem, that's when he had to act. Now that the truth was out, he hoped things would calm down. For a few days they did. But peace never stays for long in places where pride is hurt. And the HOA, even after backing down publicly, didn't forget how embarrassed they were at that meeting, especially Mr. Hawthorne. Tom had seen that look in his eyes. It wasn't just surprise, it was wounded pride, the kind of pride that doesn't fade quickly. And sure enough, within a few days, small things began to happen. First, Tom noticed that his trash wasn't being picked up anymore. The entire street's bins were empty, but his still sat full at the end of his driveway. He thought it might be a mistake, so he called the trash company. "Your address isn't listed under the HOA contract," the man on the phone told him. "We've been instructed not to service non-HOA homes anymore." Tom sighed. He knew what this was. It was their way of saying, if you're not part of us, then you don't get what we provide. But Tom was prepared for this. He simply hired a private company to collect his trash. It cost a bit more, but it worked fine. Problem solved. Then, a few days later, a landscaping crew came to trim the grass around the lake area near the public walking trail. Tom walked outside to greet them and let them know where his property line started, just to be polite. But the head of the crew shook his head. "Sorry, sir," he said. "We were told not to touch anything near your property anymore." HOA said, "It's not our responsibility." Tom smiled. "Well, they're right this time. That area is mine. Thank you for staying off it." The man looked surprised but nodded. "Good luck, sir," he said before walking off with his crew. Tom began noticing more of these little signs of separation. It was like the HOA was quietly trying to freeze him out. No more invitations to community events. No more friendly waves from certain neighbors. One woman even pulled her dog away quickly when Tom walked by, like being seen talking to him was something to avoid. Still, Tom didn't get angry. He wasn't doing anything wrong, and he refused to play their childish games. He spent his mornings fishing, his afternoons reading on his porch, and his evenings watching the sun dip into the lake. It was still his slice of peace, but then came something that went too far. One morning, Tom woke up to the sound of splashing and shouting. He looked out his window and saw a group of teenagers swimming in the lake. No problem with that, but then he saw something else. A large speaker had been set up near the shoreline. Loud music blared across the water. Several people were setting up chairs and tables. Balloons and banners were being hung on the trees. Tom walked down to the lake and approached a man carrying a box of soda cans. "What's going on here?" he asked. "Oh, birthday party," the man said cheerfully. "HOA event. They said we could use this spot. Hope you don't mind?" Tom looked around. This wasn't a small family party. It was a full event. Kids were running through the grass, people were dragging coolers onto his land, and someone had even tied a banner to one of his trees. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Did they tell you this land belongs to the HOA?" "Yeah," the man replied. "The lake and the shore. It's for everyone, right?" Tom didn't want to ruin a child's birthday, so he smiled politely. "Just enjoy the party, but after today, please let your HOA know they need my permission for events on this property." The man nodded slowly. "I'll pass that on." Tom walked back to his house, his heart heavy. He wasn't angry at the families. They were just following what they were told. But now he knew this wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. The HOA was ignoring everything. Ignoring the proof. Ignoring the agreement. Pretending like the meeting never happened. That night Tom sat in his study and began writing a letter. But this time it wasn't just to the HOA. He made copies of his deed, tax records, and the letter from the developer. Then he mailed them, not only to the HOA board, but also to the county office, the city zoning department, and a local lawyer he had quietly hired a few days before. A week later, he received a letter back from the county office. It was clear and to the point. The lake and surrounding land listed under parcel, bound 58829, are confirmed as private property belonging to Thomas Laker. No organization or group, including neighborhood associations, may use or develop this land without direct and written consent from the owner. That letter was now framed and sitting on Tom's hallway wall. The HOA, after receiving the same letter, went quiet again, but this time it wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Tom thought it was over. He thought they would finally stop. But 2 weeks later, a new sign appeared at the entrance of the neighborhood. Community Lake, for residents only. Unauthorized use will be reported. Tom stood in front of that sign for nearly 10 minutes. He read it twice, then a third time. It was bold, it was public, and it was a lie. He took a photo of it and sent it to his lawyer. By the next morning, his lawyer had sent an official cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding the removal of the sign within 48 hours, or face legal action. 47 hours. Later, the sign was gone, but that wasn't the end. Tom realized that the HOA was never going to stop unless something stronger forced them to. They were too proud, too sure that they could do whatever they wanted. They had been running things their way for too long. So Tom made a bigger move. He sent out his own letter to every home in the neighborhood. It was polite but firm. It explained the real ownership of the lake, included a copy of the legal records, and kindly asked residents to respect his land and seek permission for any events or activities involving the lake. To his surprise, many people wrote back. Some apologized for the confusion. Some thanked him for his patience. A few even invited him for coffee, wanting to learn more about the history of the area. Tom felt a bit of hope, but he also knew that the HOA wasn't finished yet. Mr. Hawthorne had been quiet, but silence from a proud man often meant planning. Tom sat on his porch that evening, watching the moon reflect on the water. The lake shimmered gently, peaceful as always. But Tom's mind was awake. He had never asked for a fight, but now that he was in one, he would not lose. The HOA had started something, but they didn't know the strength of a man who loved his land. And Tom wasn't finished yet. Tom woke up early that morning. The sky was cloudy, and the air was thick and quiet. It had been weeks since the lake incident started, and although the signs had been removed and the HOA had gone quiet again, Tom could feel that something was still brewing. The peace around the lake didn't feel real anymore. It felt temporary, like the silence just before a storm. He made a cup of coffee and walked outside onto his porch. From there he could see the lake clearly, calm and still like a mirror. For most of his life, this view gave him peace. But now it was a reminder of how something simple, his own land, had become the center of a battle with people who didn't understand respect. Tom had no plans to give up. He had already gone farther than he thought he ever would. He had spoken at a community meeting, stood up to the HOA, involved a lawyer, and sent letters across the whole neighborhood. But deep down, he knew one thing. The HOA wasn't done. They might have gone quiet, but they weren't finished. And he was right. That afternoon, a letter arrived. It was thick and official-looking, with the HOA logo stamped on the envelope. Tom opened it slowly, knowing it wasn't going to be good news. Inside was a formal notice. It said that the HOA had filed a request with the local zoning board to take control of the lake for community recreational use. They were asking the county to reclassify the lake as shared public property, stating that it had been used by the neighborhood for years and should now belong to everyone, not just a single homeowner. Tom stared at the letter for a long time. His hands shook a little, not from fear, but from anger. He had shown them every document. He had been patient. He had explained everything clearly. But they still wanted to take what was his. He knew. This wasn't about the lake. It was about pride. The HOA, especially Mr. Hawthorne, couldn't accept the fact that a quiet man like Tom had more power than them. They wanted control back. They wanted to erase the embarrassment of losing in front of everyone. And now, they were using the law to do it. Tom took a deep breath. Then he called his lawyer. The lawyer, a smart and calm man named Mr. Grayson, listened carefully and then said, "They don't have a strong case. You've got the deed, the tax records, the maps, all legal proof. But we have to show up. We have to fight it officially." A few days later, a hearing was scheduled at the county courthouse. Tom dressed neatly and arrived early. He had his folder of documents with him, the same ones he had shown at the HOA meeting. This time, though, it was more serious. If the county agreed with the HOA, Tom could lose the lake, even though he owned it. The room was small but packed. HOA board members sat on one side, dressed in their formal clothes and whispering to each other. Mr. Hawthorne was there too, looking confident. On the other side sat Tom and Mr. Grayson, calm but ready. The hearing began. The HOA lawyer stood up first. He spoke about how the lake had been used by the community for many years. He mentioned birthday parties, fishing clubs, and family picnics. He claimed that because the community had used the lake for so long, it had become a common area and should now be officially managed by the HOA. Tom listened quietly. It was painful to hear someone twist history like that. He had never stopped anyone from using the lake. He had allowed people in with kindness, and now that kindness was being used against him. Then it was Tom's turn. He stood up slowly and walked to the center of the room. "My name is Tom Laker," he said clearly. "I've lived next to that lake for over 20 years. I've paid taxes on it every single year. I have the deed. I have the map. I have the letter from the developer who built the neighborhood." He held up each paper, one by one. "For all these years, I allowed people to use the lake. I did it because I believe in being a good neighbor. I never asked for money. I never said no, until the HOA tried to tell me I didn't own it." He looked directly at Mr. Hawthorne. "They fined me. They threatened me. They put up signs. And now they want to take it from me. Not because it belongs to them, but because they don't like the fact that it doesn't." The room was silent. Tom continued, "This isn't just about a lake. It's about respect. It's about the law. And it's about not punishing someone for standing up for what's right." The county officials listened carefully. After both sides spoke, they stepped away to discuss the case. Tom sat quietly, watching the lake outside the window. Even here, miles from home, he couldn't stop thinking about it. After what felt like forever, the officials returned. One of them, a kind-looking woman with silver hair, stood up. "We have reviewed the documents," she said. "We've looked at the property records, the maps, the tax records, and the letters. Everything is clear. The lake is private property, legally owned by Mr. Thomas Laker. There will be no reclassification. The HOA has no claim to the land." A wave of relief washed over Tom. He smiled and nodded politely. The HOA members looked shocked. Mr. Hawthorne's face was red. He stood up to speak, but was told the hearing was over. Tom walked out of the courthouse with Mr. Grayson, who patted him on the back. "You did well," the lawyer said. "You stayed calm, told the truth, and let the facts do the work." Back home, word spread quickly. Some neighbors sent letters of apology. Others knocked on his door with pies and cookies, saying they were sorry for believing the HOA. Even people who had ignored him before now greeted him with respect. But the biggest surprise came a week later. Tom received a letter from the fishing club, the same one that used to meet at the lake under the HOA. It was signed by the president of the club, an older man named Dave. "Dear Mr. Laker, we apologize for the misunderstanding caused by our association with the HOA. We were unaware of the truth and regret any disrespect. We'd like to ask for your permission to use the lake again for our weekly fishing group. We will follow all rules and show full respect for your property. We hope you will consider it." Tom smiled as he read the letter. He thought about the early mornings on the lake, the sound of water lapping against the boat, and the quiet joy of sharing the place with others. He picked up a pen and wrote back, "Dear Dave, thank you for your kind letter. I appreciate your honesty and respect. You are welcome to use the lake. Just let me know in advance, and please help keep it clean. I look forward to seeing you all out there again." And so life returned to normal, but better than before. Tom was no longer the quiet man no one noticed. He was now someone who had defended what was his with calm strength and grace. The HOA no longer bothered him. Mr. Hawthorne eventually stepped down from the board, replaced by someone more thoughtful and fair. Tom continued to live by the lake, enjoying his peaceful days. He still fished in the mornings, read books in the afternoons, and watched the sun set across the water in the evenings. But now, when he looked at the lake, he didn't just see a body of water. He saw a memory, a victory, a reminder that even the quietest person can make the loudest impact when they stand up for what's right. And every now and then, a neighbor would stop by, asking for permission to swim, fish, or simply sit by the shore. Tom always said yes, with a smile, because now respect lived around the lake, and so did peace.